Welcome back to this series on writing a grid trading expert, where I'm inviting you to make suggestions in the comments to the videos on how you think that this code can be improved, or how you think that the grid trading strategy that I have here can be improved. Part one started with a very basic grid trader, simply buys and sells at every level. And in part two, I simply modified that to work with MT4 as well. Now we're down to part three, where I'm actually beginning to follow up on the suggestions that you've made. I'm trying to keep this to one suggestion in each video, so I keep the videos short. I did address one suggestion in the second video, which was one that I wasn't going to write any code for, so it was easy to address that. So in this video, though, I am going to be writing some code, and this is suggestion number 2. And the suggestion was to check a different time frame for the trend. Now, a couple of comments on this first. The essence of this grid trader is that it trades based on price movement. So a 100-point movement on a 5-minute time frame is still a 100-point movement on a daily time frame. So looking at a different time frame doesn't really matter. But I'm taking the suggestion as being to look at a particular time frame and find the trend based on that time frame. There was no detail on how to identify a trend, so I've chosen a very simple method where I'm looking for 3 consecutive candles being in the same direction, and the 3 consecutive candles includes the current day's candle. So if they're all upward candles, then I'm only going to buy. If they're all downward candles, then I'm only going to sell. But in any case, I will still close grid levels as I reach them according to the closing rules. And as I said, I am taking your suggestions on how I can improve this strategy. The code for this is in GitHub. So let's get straight to the code now and see how I'll implement this. So I'm here in the code. I'm editing in MetaTrader 5. The first thing I'll mention before I even get on to setting the trend based on daily candles is an error that was in the last video. If I go to the leg file, so this is the leg for version 1.001, I left out this line, msymbolinfo.refresh. This is in the initialization of cleg in the constructor, and it needs to come before this line where you set level size. This msymbolinfo.refresh doesn't really matter for MetaTrader 4, but in MetaTrader 5, this is how the symbolinfo class gets information like the size of a point. And if you don't call that first, then when I come to this points to double function, the size of a point is still 0. And so the level size is incorrect. So that was an error. I have already fixed this in GitHub. So that's also a reminder that you should always go to the latest version in GitHub when you're trying to get this code. All right, so we can leave those for now. I am going to, as I said before, I'll just open the containing folder for this. I'm creating a new version, so I'll copy the version 1.001 and paste that. Change the name to 1.002. Come back to the editor. And then if I just change this to 1.002, I can right click open main, change the version. And if I hover over this, I can see that, yes, I'm in the version 1.002 folder. Okay, so I've created a brand new version. All the code is still the same. I'm going to add history statements in here to the main, because as time goes on, I may not simply progress each version one after the other. I might have to go back to an older version to implement a particular suggestion because it's a better starting point. So this history in each version will show the path that this particular version has taken. And I'll just add a comment now for version 1.002, adding a trend filter based on consecutive candles. Okay, so I've changed the app version there, and I'm adding the trend filter. I'm going to update the input because I want 2 inputs for this trend filter. I want the time frame that I'm going to run the trend filter on, and then I want the number of candles that I'm going to look at for the trend. So my default for the trend time frame is going to be a daily chart. Now, this actually is not a necessary input. As I mentioned up in the intro, because this is grid trading, it doesn't really care about the time frame on the chart. A 100-point movement is a 100-point movement. So I could just as easily have said, just set the chart time frame to whatever you want to use as the trend time frame. But because of the request, I'm actually putting an input here so that I can run this on the hourly time frame and use the daily as a trend, for example. And this input trend period, that says that I'm going to look at 3 candles. And for my purposes, that's going to include the current candle. And that means that the current candle may fluctuate, that sometimes the close might be higher than the open for the current candle, and sometimes it might be lower than the open, all within the same day. So I'm going to be counting the current candle plus the 2 previous, and if they are all moving in the same direction, then I have a trend. Do a quick compile just with the input open, no errors in the input. So I'll now go back to the main. I'm doing some work in the main here rather than a lot of work in each leg because the trend is the trend. It doesn't matter if I'm on the buy leg or the sell leg, they both have the same trend. So I might as well calculate the trend once in the main file. And let me just create a function here where I can do that. So I'm calling the function trend refresh, capital R, and it's an enum order type. I don't want to simply return a 1 for an upward trend or a -1 for a downward trend, because if I make this an actual order type, buy or sell, then I can do a direct comparison to the type of the leg. So in initialization, I'm creating an array of rates which are type MQL rates, and I'm setting the order type that's to be returned with this trend current. I'm initializing that to -1, meaning there is no trend. Just going to add another input here to the function. So I can call this function with a count, and typically that's going to be the number of candles that I want to test for the trend, but I'm just making an input here rather than, or I'm making it an argument to the function here rather than using the input value. So I'm using copy rates, passing in the symbol, the trend time frame, 0 is the starting point, and count, this argument for the number of values I want to get back, and that will populate this rates array. Array setter series, because the rates array, when it's populated from copy rates, means that the rates for candle number 0 will be in the last element of the rates array. So if I'm passing in 3, which is my default count here, rates will have 3 elements. The value of rates for candle number 0, the current candle, will actually be in rates 2. It's not strictly necessary because I'm going to test every value of this rates array, but I just like to keep it lined up with the candle numbers. And now I'm going to loop through while I is less than count. So I'm going to look at every element of rates. So here I'm using a ternary operator, this question mark. So the way the ternary operator works, I have a condition. If the close for rates I is greater than the open for rates I, if that's true, then order type buy. And if that's false, now I don't simply want to call this order type sell because I might have a situation where the open and the close are identical, and that's a no trend. So I'm going to add yet another ternary. I'm just going to duplicate this, copy it in there. But in this case, if close is less than open, then that will be a sell. And the colon for the final condition here, -1. That's actually going to generate a warning when I compile it, but I'll explain it later. So now I've calculated the trend for candle number I, and it depends on whether the close is greater or less than the open for that candle. Now, if this is the first candle that I've tested, I equals 0, then the current trend is just equal to trend, or that value of that variable. I'm just setting that equal to the trend. And here I'm saying if the current trend is not equal to the trend. So if I is equal to 0, then they must be the same because I'm setting them the same here. But otherwise, if I've had a trend established because candle number 0 might be an upward, and now I've reached candle number 1 and it's downward, then trend is different to current trend or trend current. And so if they're different, I haven't got 3 consecutive candles and I just return a -1. But then finally, I just return trend current, because there is also a possibility that trend in the very first candle is -1 because it's a 0 movement. So where close is the same as open. So I'll just return trend current there. So now that I have that function here in the on tick for the main, I'm going to get that value. I get that by calling the function trend refresh and passing the input trend period. So now I have a trend current. What I want to do is pass that to these legs. I could have made it a global variable, but I'm actually going to pass it in as an argument here, which means I'll have to make a modification to the leg. Okay, so that's all done. And now if I go to the on tick function for the leg, I need to add trend current, and I'll also have to add that to the signature. There it is, on tick. Same thing there. Now, in this on tick function, I still want to close trades regardless of the trend. So I'll go past all of this code where I'm closing trades. But before I get to the code for opening trades, I'm just going to add a condition here. And this is why I'm setting trend current as an order type rather than a plus or minus one. I can simply compare it to the order type for the leg. And if they're not the same, then I return. And that's all it takes to avoid opening these trades if the trend is not 3 consecutive candles in the direction of that leg. Let me just make sure I don't have any typing errors at least. All compiles. Now here is the warning that I said I would get. Implicit enum conversion. And it's in this ternary. I might just wrap this around a little bit. So the reason I'm getting it, I'm declaring the result as an enum order type, and one of the arguments here, -1, is not actually an enum order type, and therefore I get that warning message. I can fix this in a couple of ways. I can either add enum order type here to cast that -1. So even though -1 is not a valid order type, this casting still tricks the compiler into believing. So I can just go back here and compile, and warning message is gone. Now the other thing I can do is simply change this to an int, because I can store enums in the int, and I also have to change this trend current to an int. But then because this is returning an enum order type, I need to do a casting here. Got parenthesis the wrong way. So that will also avoid the error. Let me just, or avoid the warning. So no warnings there. I'll leave it like that because I think that's neat. It gets rid of the warning and it still works. So now that I've made those changes, we should go back to run some tests. I'm also going to, because this is 1.002, I have the baseline available. What I'm going to do is just save this Grid Trader MQ5 as Grid Trader base and set that back to 1.00. So now I have Grid Trader base at version 1.00 and Grid Trader at version 1.002. If I go now to MetaTrader 5, so this is Grid Trader base. Let me just check the inputs, 100.01. I should change that. Grid Trader, just a comment, it's not important. All right, so I've got all the settings ready. I can rerun this, and it's 15 months from the 1st of January 23 to the 1st of April 24. Every tick, 1 hour, Euro USD. So running the baseline, here is the chart that we saw previously. A slightly growing or gradually increasing gap between the equity and the balance, but everything's generally trending upwards. So it's not doing too badly. The profit, $5,021 over 15 months. Equity drawdown absolute 578 and the maximum 1991. This equity drawdown absolute is important. I mentioned in the last video, and I'll mention it again, that I'm setting this as a $10,000 account because I'm simulating using a particular type of prop account from xrating.com. They do pronounce it trading, but I just can't bring myself to do that, mainly because I don't want to have confusion with the other trading.com. So xrating.com will provide a $10,000 account with a $1,000 deposit. So this, what looks like a 50% profit on the $10,000 account, is actually a 500% profit on the $1,000 deposit. But one of the few rules they do have is a maximum drawdown of 10%. So $578 on the $10,000 account is less than 10%. So this would have been a successful account to have. They do have some other conditions which actually work in favor of the account, in that once the profit, that's equity profit, has reached 20% of that initial $10,000, then they actually add another $10,000 to the account. But it's very difficult to simulate that in the back test, so I'm not worrying about it. So now I will go to Grid Trader, which is the version 1.002. Just check the inputs. Still 100 points, a 1-day trend time frame, and 3 periods. Order size 0.01. Change that comment again. Okay, I will begin before I do the comparison test. I'll set this to a daily time frame so that you can actually see the visual, and I'll turn on the visuals so we can see how it's trading and that it is, hopefully we can see that it's trading in the direction of the trend. Now at this point, trading has started. I have an upward candle here and an upward candle here, and this is the open candle, and it is upward as well. It's very hard to see with the other information on screen, but that candle is actually trending up. Let me just zoom in, might be easier to see. There, so the current candle is also upward. I'll move on now until we get a point where the 3 candles aren't aligned, and then we can see that it's not trading there. So hopefully you can see this. I've got 2 upward candles, one here, one here. The current candle did go up. There's a wick here where it's gone up and opened a couple of extra trades, but at the moment it's down, so it's not trading in this space. So that's me checking the current candle as well as the 2 previous candles. Now I'm just going to let it run on a little further and show something that I've observed with this particular modification. Now this shows something of what I'm talking about. If you remember from the baseline, there would be trade lines all through this space where it's been to a minimum and to a maximum. There'd be trades everywhere. In fact, there would be trades down here at this low end because it has been to this point and then retreated. What I'm seeing with this modification is some gaps because the trend is not in the right direction, so it doesn't take a trade at every level. And it's also been cleaning up some of the outliers. So at the very bottom here, it would have taken trades, and then because the trend reversed, it took no more sell trades, but because there has been a wick that's come down, it actually closed those sell trades and hasn't left them behind. So this particular modification is achieving something of what it's talking about. But at this point where we are now, I can still see that it has reached a high point where it's taken a trade. There was no subsequent wick to close that buy trade, and so I'm still getting trades left behind, just not as many. And I expect that over time, it will still show the same behavior where there will be the very outlier left behind, just not as many trades. So rather than continue with the visual, I'm just going to stop this, set it back to the hourly, because although 100 points is 100 points on a daily and on an hourly, because I'm running this in the back tester, the data sets for daily and hourly might not be exactly the same. So I finished that run, and you can see that the chart looks a little bit more erratic, but you have to be aware that the scale is different because we haven't achieved the same level of profit. So this is a much narrower scale. So these movements look a little bit bigger than they did on the baseline chart. If I just go to the backtest results though, I can see that the total net profit is only $452 using this method, where the baseline was over 5,000. The absolute drawdown is also less, 121, still within the 10% drawdown for the prop account. But I think that overall, the low level of profit means that this might not be a great method to follow. I will put these results into the README that goes onto GitHub. There'll be a table in the README file there so that you can compare this. And over time, I will add all of the results from other versions. So remember, keep submitting your suggestions. I will consider that if you add a comment to a video and you have a suggestion, that the comment is relevant to the version in that video, because otherwise it's too hard to try to determine what you're trying to comment on. So leave your comments if you have ideas on how to improve any of these particular grid strategy codes. So that's all I have for today. And remember, leave the comments and tell me what you think could be modified here to improve this particular strategy. Thank you for watching.